Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Carnivorous Grandma Speaks. My name is Robin Heron, and I am your Carnivorous Grandma, and I'm super honored to be here tonight with our friend, Dr. Shawn Baker. Welcome, Dr. Shawn.
Well, thank you, Carnivorous Grandma. Thanks for having me here. Appreciate it.
You are so welcome. I am so grateful that you took me up on my offer to come and have an interview on my channel. Tonight, I really want to talk about. We know, I mean, most of us who know you know that you've been carnivore for a long time. You literally wrote the book on the topic. And I want to kind of talk a little bit tonight about how your ideas have evolved over time and how things change as you live with an approach over years and how your clinical thinking about this approach has changed over time. Of course, everybody knows that I'm not a doctor. I'm just a grandma of 11 who is super concerned about what I see happening within my community, which is a lot of metabolic disorder, a lot of people dying untimely deaths based on things that could literally be changed if they were to change their nutrition. So, Dr. Shawn, for anybody who's been hiding under a rock and has never heard of you, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, thank you, Robin. My name is Shawn Baker. I'm an MD. I was, my background is in orthopedic surgery, so I spent a couple decades, replacing hips and knees and treating broken bones and doing trauma surgeries, and enjoyed that, but sort of found myself drawn more towards the lifestyle side of medicine, the side that actually prevents disease and in many cases cures disease. And so that is kind of the overview. I mean, I've been an athlete my whole life. I served in the military. I'm not a grandpa, but I got 4 kids, so maybe one day. I'm not quite ready for that, but
Yes.
I'm about to turn 60 in under a year. So
Okay.
maybe by the time I'm
Me
70,
too.
I'll be a grandpa. So
Hmm.
I'm a co-founder of a company called Rivera. We are, a medical company licensed in all 50 states, and we do the metabolic, care that does, as you mentioned, prevent disease, reverse disease, prevent all this tragedy, all the sometimes unnecessary death and all the other things that go with that. So yeah, that's been my background. As you mentioned, I did write the book, The Carnivore Diet. I was the first guy to sort of popularize in broad fashion that name for that. I'm not the first guy to talk about eating only meat. In fact, there's doctors going back several hundred years that have been talking about this stuff. So it's not a new thing, and humans
Hmm.
have kind of been the same, and we're still the same. We'll still be the same for a long time to come. But again, we live in a time and a place where we think that technology is the answer to everything. That we think that we can science our way out of everything
Hmm.
and sort of deny our own biology. And I'm thankful that I get to sleep in an air conditioned or a heated home and a comfortable bed and drive a car and don't have to walk everywhere or take a horse or something like that these days. And so technology is indeed wonderful and helpful and has undoubtedly, made a lot of lives easier. But at the same time, I think we've also caused some problems. And I think our food
Hmm.
is a huge part of that. So that is me in sort of a nutshell. And I've got with me my little sidekick today, Daisy. She's our
Oh
new
my
puppy. She's a little mini dachshund. And
So
we've had her
adorable.
for we've had her for we've had only had her for about a day, and she had her first little bit of meat
Oh,
this morning, and she loved it.
oh my goodness.
She
So
was
I'm
pretty happy.
assuming that she's going to be a carnivore puppy.
Oh yeah, yeah. She's gonna be a carnivore
Hmm.
puppy for sure. Like my other dogs. My other two. It's kind of funny. My other 2 dogs are like, they don't know what to do with her yet. They're still kind of feeling her out. They kind of run when she comes. They run away. Which is funny because they're like 10 times her size. So it's kind of cute to see that. So
Oh,
so she so
she's
I yeah. So
adorable.
she's learning the ropes. So I got to keep her pretty close to me. So she's done a couple podcasts today, a couple interviews, consults, and so she's been helping me out. So anyway, I've got her right on the table next to me.
Sure she's going to be an expert in no time.
Probably, yeah.
So I'd like to kind of just take a little step back because like we said, you're the one of the first voices that was out here talking about carnivore, writing a book about it. Not that it's new because it is an ancestral way of eating, right? But before it became like a movement or this carnivore label was placed on it, what was it that led you to actually go towards a meat only way of eating?
Yeah. So, in part, my own health. I mean, I think many physicians that sort of adopt a nutrition or a lifestyle approach usually do it, out of necessity themselves. They see that their health is not what it should be, and they know what the care system is about, just mitigating, managing the symptoms. And maybe they decide for themselves, it's, for my patients, we'll just do this, but for me, I'm not doing that. It's interesting. If you poll like orthopedic surgeons on whether or not they would have a knee replacement, many of them would say no, even though they
Hmm,
recommend it to their patients all the time.
interesting.
So, and it depends on the circumstance, obviously. But for me, I was already low carb. I was low carb. I was keto and doing pretty well. I mean, I thought for the first time my appetite was in check.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm a pretty big guy. As some of you guys know, I'm 6'5". I'm 250-ish pounds right now. I used to be even bigger. I used to be about 300 pounds. I could eat a lot, and I like to eat, and I still like to eat. I got a big
Me too.
appetite and can put it away. And, I was just looking to continue my knowledge on nutrition as it applies, because I started applying diet and nutrition to my own patients in the orthopedic surgery practice with good result. And as I looked to learn more, I came across this curious group of people doing a zero carb diet. This is a group
Mhm.
led by a fellow named by the name of Charles Washington. I think he's out of
Yep.
somewhere in Pennsylvania, maybe Philadelphia, I think. Super nice guy. Anyway, he had a little group of, maybe a few thousand people that were talking about this meat only diet. And I somehow stumbled across it. It was a Facebook group. And I thought it
Mhm.
was really strange. I thought this is really weird, like everybody does. And like,
Yep.
this can't be right. But, I had an open mind because I'd already kind of adopted a low carb mindset. And so I said, this is back in 2016 that I started, kind of dabbling with this. And so I started playing a little bit with the diet myself. Finally, at the end of 2016, I did it for a whole month, and I was just blown away by how good I felt. I was like, wow, I literally felt better than I had in maybe a decade or so. And then I
Mhm.
just persisted, ended up, sort of talking about it on social media. This is before anyone else was doing it, particularly physicians. I mean, there were a few non-physicians talking about this, but I was the first real physician that talked about it with any sort of sizable platform. And then I got picked up on a pretty big podcast, Joe Rogan's podcast, that kind of got me on the map, so to speak, and a lot of
Mhm.
people's voices. And then I just, kept plugging away, and I'm here. Here I am, pretty much 10 years later, and still going strong.
So, like, when you first started, what was the biggest, like, shocker for you? I mean, you're coming from keto, so keto's pretty close, right? It gets you really, really close. I don't know. For me, I still dealt with the carb cravings, so I kept going on Cheeto and stuff like that. So, but what was the
Cheeto.
biggest shocker that you had?
Well, for me, again, I wasn't particularly ill going into this. Again, this was me kind of thinking about my athletic performance. The biggest
Mhm.
shockers for me were, one, I had a dramatic improvement in my physical capacity from an athletic standpoint. I was just shocked
Mm.
by how much stronger I got, by how much more output I could produce. As I was kind of, very very meticulously, observing these things. I was really surprised by how much better it made my joints feel. In one
Mhm.
particular, I had pretty significant tendonitis in my right knee, or my quadriceps, and that had been with me for 10 years. I just thought I was going to live with it for the rest of my life. And then
Mhm.
within about 3 months, it completely resolved, which and as an orthopedic surgeon, this is stuff I dealt with every day, and know all the various tips and tricks and treatment modalities, and none of it had really worked for me. So that was pretty cool. And then the other thing that was really interesting for me was my digestion. As I mentioned,
Mhm.
on keto, my appetite was pretty much in check. I felt pretty satiated, but I still could feel like, when I was eating all the salads and all the spinach and all the, nuts and berries and things like that, my
Mhm.
gut was always just kind of a little bit like, in retrospect, probably a little inflamed and a little bit bloated. That went away completely. It was like going from driving a beat up Chevy Pinto to a luxury, German Mercedes. There's just no noise.
Wow.
It was just like, it was like smooth. It was like I didn't even notice I was digesting anything. And that was on basically a meat only diet. And so for me, that was the most, those were the things that happened to me personally. Now, on a physician scale, I mean, I've seen so many things that have just been incredibly, just mind-blowingly interesting about how other people have healed, because I deal with these folks on a daily basis, and I've directly dealt with thousands of people, and
Mhm.
indirectly probably have been, sort of part of the process for, gosh, I don't even know how many more, hundreds of thousands, if not millions at this point.
Wow. Amazing, amazing. I think that that is really the thing, right? Is that most people who try this for any length of time see some profound differences. I'll tell you that for me, I guess the first thing, and I didn't even realize this was happening, was my seasonal allergies went away. Like, and I was so allergic to everything. Every single season, I was allergic to stuff, and, that for I started in February, and then this is gonna be my 3rd carniversary in February, and that spring, I didn't have any allergies. I didn't need to take any. Oh, our baby's crying.
Yeah, she wants to be
Okay.
held. So, but then, yeah,
Yes.
the allergies went away. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
seen that
they
a
went
lot of times as
away.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, and I guess the one thing that I was thinking about when you said about a physical capacity, I was thinking about how a lot of times athletes will do this carb loading, like load up on carbs to get that physical, intensity. And so I think we were talking about this last night, how carnivore really, like, you don't need to do that carb loading to get the physical energy that you need.
Yeah, that, a lot of people that are advocates of carbohydrates, and I think they're conditionally beneficial. I'm not here to universally say that carbs are poisoning everybody and things like that, but I think for certain people, it absolutely makes sense to reduce or eliminate them for, either short term or long term, depending on what your goals and what your preferences are. But we
Mhm.
are starting to realize that the concept of carb loading for glycogen, which is what we think, glycogen is stored in the liver and in our muscles primarily. And the
Mhm.
thought is, if we fill our muscles up with glycogen, we'll perform better. And what it turns out, and this is from data from like back in 1967 when they did some studies up in Scandinavia about this stuff, they saw that carbs were leading to improved glycogen storage, and then performance was also improved in those cases. But the reality is, it seems to be more related to blood glucose levels. And so, if you have filled up muscle and liver glycogen, your blood glucose levels might stay uh, uh, elevated longer, and that seems to be the performance advantage, because what it does is when our brain senses our blood glucose level, if it sees a drop, then it shuts the body down to protect
Mhm.
ourselves. There's this so-called central governor theory, which has been proposed by Professor Tim Noakes.
Mhm.
And that seems to hold up in many cases. And for most sporting activities, most gym going activities that probably 99.99% of the people will do, um, the carbs are not necessary. I mean, they are a lot of people like the way they taste. They're convenient, they're quick, they're cheap.
Yes.
They have a predictable glucose response, but they're not
Mhm.
necessary for most people. Now, there's probably a subset of athletes where it is an advantage. These might be long distance endurance athletes at the highest levels. It might be people doing repeated uh, events throughout the day, maybe like a CrossFit athlete who's doing 2 or 3
Mm.
workouts a day, or
Mhm.
people engaged in really intense exercise greater than an hour. Um, that generally doesn't describe almost anyone. I mean, I compete
Right.
at high levels as a master athlete, to the fact that I've broken world records and still compete at a very elite level across multiple different activities, um, without carbs, without any significant carbs at all. Sometimes I'll have some dairy, which has a little bit of carbohydrate in there, but generally, I'm pretty much zero to very low carb,
Mhm.
and don't have any issues at all performing. And many other people are like me. I'm not the only guy, for sure.
Yeah, I've been watching you, like, with these heavy weights lifting. Oh my gosh. Like, you go, and you said that you're turning 60. I'm turning 60, and I don't think I could lift a weight like that.
Well, it's
Not
just a
today
matter,
anyway.
well, you got to, I've been, let me just be clear. I've been doing this my whole life. I started lifting
Mhm.
weights when I was a 13-year-old kid. That was
Okay.
46 years ago, and I've never stopped. I've never taken a week
Mm.
off. I just do it.
Wow.
So, and like I said, it's never too late to start, but it's better to start yesterday than tomorrow. And, and if the only choice you have is today, start today. And I would encourage all of your listeners to get that
Mhm.
way, because in my view, even though I'm probably one of the world's leading advocates of the carnivore diet, and I think nutrition is critically important, that which distinguishes those people that age very well and those that do not is primarily, you know, pushing capacities in
Mm.
physical capacities to include exercise, strength training, sprinting, jumping, skipping, hopping, you know, cycling hard. All those things are going to provide a significant performance and longevity and health benefit, in my view.
Well, that is awesome. Thank you for sharing that, because, where a lot of us are living a very sedentary lifestyle. I don't know about most of the people that are watching, but I work from home. I stand at the desk. I try not to sit so much because I find myself sitting at the desk for many, many hours, 6 to 8 hours a day. And it's like, that's kind of crazy. So I'll stand, I'll march in place, I'll try to get my movement in. But as far as lifting heavy things, weight training, sprinting. I did do some skipping the other day, so I felt pretty
It's
good
a
about
starting
that.
place. That's a starting. And skipping is a kind of a prerequisite to sprinting. You know, sprinting is a sort of an apex human level activity. It's some of the most stresses you can experience across your muscles occurring during sprinting, particularly at high speeds. And so
Mhm.
preparing those tissues to handle that starts with things like hopping in place and skipping and jumping rope and bounding and all those types of things. And so that is
Okay.
what I've done a lot. I had a long preparatory base of that, you know, a couple of years of that. And I would encourage people to start that direction, even if it's just, you know, hopping around in place a little bit, skipping in place. It's fun. Skipping's fun too. You know, I
Oh
remember when
my
you did as a kid.
gosh.
Yeah,
I
skipping's
had a
fun.
blast with my
Yeah.
grandkids skipping
Yeah.
around the house. It was fun. A lot of fun. So tell us a little bit about how you're eating today. Are you just purely carnivore or ketovore, or I mean, do you put a label on it even?
Well, I mean, I eat what I like to eat, and I like to eat a lot of meat, fortunately. So I'm probably, you know, I mean, over the period of 10 years, probably 90 to 95% of my diet has come from red meat. It's been steaks,
Okay.
burgers, you know, roasts, things like that. Um, I will consume eggs from time to time. I will consume fish from time to time. I will consume dairy. I have, you know, phases where I go in and out, you know, and then every once in a while I'll have something that's not carb, or every once in a while I'll have, you know, like something that's off plan. That's maybe a couple times a year at most.
Mhm.
I will tell you, and there's a YouTube video that's going to come out on this probably in a week or so. I did do a little experiment where I added carbs in for 30 days to see what would
Ooh.
happen. And I won't relieve all, I won't tell all the details here, but I didn't stick with that. I don't want to stick with that. You know, there was more bad than good for me personally. So because people ask me, well, you know, if you do carnivore, you can never eat carbs again. I said, that's
Mm.
nonsense. You know, you can adapt
Mhm.
back to it, and certainly, I think again, I'm not dogmatic about this stuff, but I mean, I prefer a carnivorous diet. I've preferred it all the time, and you know, it makes it's how I feel better, and to me, that's
Mhm.
what, and I perform better, and you know, maybe arguably look better, but that is what to me is important. You know, at the end of the day, because honestly, I don't know what my cholesterol is right this second. Neither do you,
Mhm.
unless you're wearing a
Mhm.
monitor that tracks cholesterol every minute. I
Right.
don't know what my potassium is. I don't know what my homocysteine is. I don't know what my testosterone is. So I don't really worry about the numbers so much, because
Mhm.
they're always changing. And you know, anybody comes
Right.
in and says, "Oh, this is my blood test," and look at me and I'm bragging about that. I'm like, it's almost ridiculous to do so. So anyway, I forget what the point of the question was, but anyway, we got somewhere.
It's okay. You got Rick in here, Charger Mopar. He says, "Are you eating
I,
me duck or iguana?"
I've never had iguana. I know Rick. I've talked to Rick over the years, and I met him in
Yes.
Florida for the first time at Hack Your Health in Tampa. Actually, Rick, I'm coming back to Tampa or St. Pete in April, so
Oh,
maybe
cool.
maybe for a visit.
Nice.
So anyway, the question was, no, duck or iguana? No, I've had duck. Duck is quite good. I enjoy
It
duck.
is good.
But as far as iguana, I don't know. I would eat it if somebody had it for me, you know. But I prefer. I think I'm gonna like beef better than iguana. Something tells me that. I don't know.
Probably.
Duck probably
Probably.
iguana probably tastes like chicken. I'm guessing for
I
maybe so they can
imagine
convert 'em.
so. They
Yeah.
most meats do. So I before we get off the topic of food, I just have to ask about this knife because I see you eating these huge steaks with a giant knife. And I want to I want to know if you can tell us a little bit about the knife that you're using to cut your
Well, I've
steak.
actually got several knives. I've got, several of them. You know, at first, I don't know why I got a big knife. I think I was trying to cut up some big piece of steak, and I wanted a decent knife for that. And then
Uh-huh.
I started like filming it, and and I'm pretty lazy, so I'm like, I don't wash this. I'll just eat right off the cutting board. And actually, a big knife, it cuts it nicer. It's just a nicer, sensation. You know, when you get a little tiny steak, and I'm a big guy, so a little tiny steak knife, and you're like sawing through the meat.
Uh-huh.
It's just not as it's a less of a nice eating experience. So visually, it's kind of interesting. So I bought this
Mhm.
little knife. It's like a bullnose, knife from a company called Shan, which I got at Costco, believe it or not.
Oh,
And
wow.
then from that time, a number of people sent me knives just as kind of speak. Like I go to speak at a conference, somebody gets me a knife, and so I've got a bunch of knives from that. So I've got various. Some of them are just custom made knives. Some of them are I can't remember. Some of them were. I bought one from like Dallas Strong. This sort of called the Shadow Black series, like a pure black
Mm.
knife, and it looks pretty cool. It's pretty
Mhm.
thick. Yeah, those are the knives. And honestly, when I don't have my big knife, the steak doesn't taste as good. It's kind of funny. It's like it seems like the steaks will take better when you have it because you can make this nice. If you keep them sharp, you can make this really nice, smooth cut, and it just eats better.
Mhm. Oh, man, I really, really enjoy watching those videos. First of all, the sidebar snark is so high. I love it so much. When you're watching the videos and cutting your cutting your huge steak with your knife. So those are really great. I enjoy them very, very much. So
Yeah, thanks.
thanks.
They've been very popular over the years. I did that one time just as like a joke. Because I think I was watching some vegan make some like elaborate vegan recipe with like 300 ingredients. I'm like, I'm eating a steak. It's so much easier to get good nutrition. And then that went kind of viral, so we kind of replicated that. And so now we just have, I must have filmed myself eating steak 100 times, and I just got it. I sent it to the social media team, and they just clip in things, so it's kind of funny. So, but it's yeah,
Yes.
some of this stuff's and I'll find stuff that I say this is ridiculous, and I'd send it to the team, and they just clip that in, so it's hilarious. So
Oh my gosh. It is it never gets old. I'll say that. It never gets old. We enjoy watching those. So thank you. All right. So let's talk a little bit about your clinical thinking over time. When you're
okay.
thinking long term, so you did mention Rivero, which health markers or trends do you find most useful? And which do you think are often overemphasized?
Well, let's start with the most useful things first of all. When it comes to assessing health, I like to look at sort of long term clinical outcomes, right? And so, for instance, one of the simplest thing to look at is a simple waist to height ratio. And this doesn't require any labs or any special equipment or really any money. All you gotta do is take, maybe a tape measure. So you just, look at your height, whatever your height is. Like for instance, I'm 6'5", so that's 77 inches, and so I want my waist to be at least half that, or at least half
Mm,
less than that. I mean, no more than half that. So half of that's 38 and a half inches, and so that's measured at the belly button. Relax, so you're not sucking your gut in, but just relaxed. It
mhm.
should be under 38, and ideally, probably, I think the optimal amount is something like 46% of your height is what your waist should be. So that's a simple one. Everybody should do that, and I think that's critically important because having excess fat around your middle, central adiposity, dementia, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, depression, uh, you know, eh,
Yes.
every negative outcome you can think of is associated with that. So you want to
Right.
be working on that. And for most people, I say just focus on that. Don't spend a year focused on that. Get to where you probably remember, Rob. You probably remember the old Special K commercial. It said, "Can you pinch more than an inch?" Remember that?
Uh-huh. Yep.
That's true. I mean, you shouldn't be able to reach down there and grab more than an inch of belly fat. If you can, you got work to do. So that's
Yes.
the first thing I look at. I'm a big fan of imaging. I mean, when it comes to
Okay.
cardiovascular disease, I think a CAC score, which we've been talking about for 5 or 6 years now, is still very important and very useful. I
Yes.
think that blood pressure is important. I think having a normal blood pressure is an important marker. I think when it comes to specific labs, again, they vary so much, so I have a hard time just focusing on one of those. I mean, I think there's one sort of proprietary test called a lipoprotein insulin resistance score. This is a test that LabCorp performs, and it
Mhm.
looks at it's like an advanced lipid panel, and it looks at that in the context of insulin resistance, and that seems to correlate pretty high with cardiovascular disease. Just some of the things that they're often sort of misinterpreted, particularly in the context of higher protein or carnivore diets, or things around like kidney function. A lot of times we'll get something called a creatinine, and
Mhm.
that's often used to calculate the kidney function, so-called GFR, or what's known as a glomerular filtration rate. And the problem with that test, in the context of a higher protein carnivore diet, is the creatinine will be artificially elevated, even though the kidneys aren't being injured. So that's something to be aware of. So I prefer cystatin C in that case. I think that when it comes to, the various lipid panel numbers we look at, obviously a lot of people will focus on LDL or total cholesterol, or what's more in vogue lately is the ApoB number. And all three of those,
Mhm.
quite honestly, if one's high, they're all typically going to be higher. Um, that is, I think, very nuanced. I think we can't just use
Right.
that number in isolation without some of these other things that we now know are important. Triglycerides are probably important, but they can be very noisy. Insulin is helpful. I mean, particularly if it's, I think when it's really high, that's a real big red flag. So if your insulin level,
Mhm.
fasting insulin level is 20, 30, something like that, that's a real problem. If it's below 10, some people say below 5, we're probably in a better shape when it comes to insulin sensitivity. Those are some of the things that we look at. We look at a lot of, Rivera, we look at most of those things.
Mhm.
I think that it's important to put things in context, because a lot of people talk about, well, sometimes T3, or thyroid hormone, active thyroid hormone, will dip in a low carb setting. And we know that that could be completely normal depending on what's going on. It may not necessarily indicate pathology. It may just be a normal physiologic adaptation, because just like we have insulin sensitivity, the receptor becomes more sensitive, so we don't need as much insulin.
Right.
We can become thyroid sensitive. We can become androgen or estrogen sensitive. So we don't need as much hormone to get the same number of job done. And if we don't
Mhm.
need as much hormone, the organs aren't under as much stress to produce those hormones. And so I think that's something that it's kind of an evolving concept that many people still don't know. Even physicians don't seem to get this, and that's something to be aware of and put things in context. That's why I like to look at the whole person and see how they're doing, seeing if things are functioning. Just because I get labs sent to me all the time, some numbers are out of range, and
Mhm.
they want me to know what to do, and I'm like, I don't know any information about you, so it's
Right.
almost impossible for me to make a
Yeah.
informed decision on a lot of this. So labs are really
Right.
helpful for. I think labs are helpful in sickness, for helping us to identify sickness and interact. But a lot of times when we are well and healthy and feeling good, the labs can be
Mhm.
sometimes misinterpreted.
Yes. That's true. And I think, I mean, we a lot of times early on we'll use labs to get those baseline markers, right? But I want to just ask a question about this kidney thing, because I have a number of people in my sphere that are dealing with kidney disease
Hmm.
and kidney transplants and things like that. And um I wanted to just know, like, when we think about kidney function, you know, what should we be thinking in terms of that? What kind of way should we? I mean, does it matter if they're still eating a lot of carbohydrates after they get that kidney transplant, or even while they're dealing with kidney disease? Or I mean, I guess I'm curious to know what your take is on that, because
Sure.
a lot of people are, getting really, really sick with kidney disease and needing a transplant and getting a transplant.
Well, I mean, arguably the number one cause of kidney failure in this country and much of the Western world is related to diabetic disease. This is what all these dialysis centers are set up, and there's a lot of diabetics in there.
Mhm.
And kidney health, in large part, and for most of the situation, most patients is tightly correlated to their overall metabolic health. And so if they are, somebody's in there drinking Coca-Colas and eating potato chips, and that's a lot of their dieting, all this ultra processed food. Yeah, I mean, if they have a kidney transplant, it's gonna have the same issues that the other kidney had. I mean, if it's driving that. And so I think that fixing your metabolic health, and we see that all the time, even in people with um, you know, kidney disease, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 kidney disease, can go on a cleaner diet, low carb, keto, carnivore, and see their kidneys start to recover. We've seen that multiple times over and over again. And so I think it is this diet of ultra processed, uh, highly addictable, chemically laden. I like to call it human pet food. And as you
Yeah.
probably are aware, the new U.S. dietary guidelines seem to
Yes.
try to strongly dissuade people from consuming those things, and then
Yes.
also are now saying, hey, let's, it's okay to eat meat and milk and butter and eggs and things like that, which has been kind of in the past, we were told to steer away from that. And the problem is when you cut out animal fats from the diet and you cut out these whole food nutritious things like, the foods I mentioned, we often try to fill the hole somewhere else with high energy foods. And those high
Mhm.
energy foods tend to be these ultra processed lab creations, which are, coming from the factories and designed to be addictive, are not a good idea. So this is why I think, because somebody mentioned the other day, because you see that they're talking about putting whole milk back in the school lunch program. And I remember I was a kid, it was
Yes.
you got the red milk cartons; those were whole milk, and then the blue
Yes.
ones were the low fat ones,
Exactly.
and that
Yes.
they got rid of that, some 20 some years ago or something like that.
Mhm.
And somebody said, well, it's, the nutrition is not that much different. There's only more fat, but that's the point. We know that, and there's several studies that support this. When kids drink whole milk, they don't often snack as much, and they don't
Mm.
go run into the sugary, high carb junk food that's so prevalent in the school system and that so many kids eat. So it does have a, while the nutrition, again, and I think the fat is also a nutrient. We need calories, but we need to have calories that, impact us in a way as to not lead to more hunger. We know that carbs are the least satiating macronutrient. So when we
Yes.
eat carbs, it's easier to continue to eat them. Everybody knows they got that second dessert stomach, right? Oh, I'm full. I can't have another bite. Hey, you want some of this peach pie? Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
It's always funny how
Absolutely.
that works, right?
Yeah, that is so true. And since you touched on the new food guidelines, I'm just curious to know what your take is on the guidelines themselves. Like, what do you think about it?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and the most probably controversial part in the low carb sphere is that they left a 10% saturated fat cap on there. And
Yeah.
I talked to one of the guys that wrote the guy that helped Ty Beal, who is was on the committee to help inform that. And I asked him what was the most compelling data that would tell you to do that, and he said, well, there really isn't any.
Oh
But
my
I
goodness.
I wasn't in
Yeah.
charge of the final guidelines, but the reality is, and as you saw, RFK and then Secretary Brooke Rollins, who wrote the first page of those dietary guidelines, they said that focus on real food, eat red meat, eat milk, drink milk, eat eggs and things like that, eat butter.
Yes.
That was put out, and that's a consumer document. That's what they're telling you and I to do, because it's not impacted by policy. There's no policy telling me what I can buy at the grocery store. At least, knock on wood. Hopefully, there'll never be. I can buy whatever I want.
Mhm.
And as you see, that was put in a pyramid shape, and it was intentionally put upside down. That was not an
Yeah.
accident. They did that on
No.
purpose. They're sending a
Right.
signal. We're going away from this grain based 1990 11 grams or 11 servings of fiber, or grains a day. And the
Mhm.
other thing that's important is, as all of us, that read English, where do you start? You start top left of the page and you read across, left to right,
Yes.
top to bottom. What's the first
Right.
thing you come to at the top left of that pyramid?
Big old steak.
It's not just any steak, it's a ribeye steak.
Ribeye.
Yeah. And it wasn't
Yes.
done intentionally. I mean, it wasn't done accidentally. It was intentionally.
Mhm.
Put a ribeye steak as the first food you see. That I think, and Bobby Kennedy has said many times, I eat a carnivore diet, or mostly a carnivore diet. And I think that's intentional. That's the signal to the consumers. Now, on the policy side, what they feed kids in school, what they feed our military, what they feed, hospital guidelines and so on and so forth, they have these other things. And so I think, um, you know, I think, and this is what I've said all along, this so-called Make America Healthy Again movement only works if Americans want to go there. And we are
Mhm.
the ones that are going to determine that. You and I and our families, people we love, this
Yes.
this is how it changes. It's not some government policy or some government rule, because a lot of people, and no one, I mean, I didn't consult the dietary guidelines when I went to the grocery store before.
Right.
It's who, and no one does. But what I do is what I think. And when you have somebody at the highest level saying red meat, eggs, milk, whole milk, and again on that little pictograph, it doesn't just say milk, it says whole milk, right? It's
Right.
very intentionally done. They are embracing animal fat, on a very symbolic level, and this is symbolism
Mhm.
here. If like I said, if you read the actual document, I haven't read the 462 page addendum. I mean, I don't have time for that, but in general, it's not it's not so much dissimilar to guidelines in the past, although it's been a deep emphasis of some of the plants. The grain recommendation has gone down from 11 to 3 to 4 servings. So there are some substantive shifts, but at the end of the day, it's really going to depend upon what you and I do, and rather than what someone legislates or some public policy has. And so we have the power to change the markets. And what
Mhm.
you're doing right now, our conversation, the people that are listening to it, you are the guys who are going to make the difference. So, and I always tell people, if you don't like the fact that you're getting poisoned by the food in the grocery store, just stop buying it. Don't give these
There you
guys
go.
money. If you pay people to poison you, they're going to keep poisoning you. So stop giving your money. Learn how to cook.
Exactly.
I'm sure
Uh,
grandma knows how to cook, right? I mean, it's
yeah.
like, back, and a lot of our kids these days don't know.
Mhm.
They think that food comes from a package, or, that's how you
Yes.
cook. You press the microwave button, or,
Mhm.
it's funny. I tell this story. There was a study done a few years back looking at breakfast cereal consumption among millennials or Gen Z, and they said they're eating less breakfast cereal, and it's not for the reasons you think, because it's all sugary junk. No, it was because to eat breakfast cereal, you have to pour milk into a dish and rinse a dish and put it in the dishwasher, and that's too much work, right? But if I just have a little
Yeah.
breakfast bar in a package, I can rip it open, throw it
Mhm.
in my mouth, and I'm done, and there's less work.
Yep.
So it's a
Exactly.
convenience thing. So we've conveniently made ourselves fat and sick, and we've got to go away from that.
Exactly.
So the guidelines are, I think, a starting place, but it's not going to be the end of the discussion. And, I will tell you that, as you may be aware, I mean, they're going to fight, and they're fighting every step of the way, tooth and nail, these companies. Even the food diet people are fighting and trying to slap, injunctions and court orders to stop them from doing that. And that's just the food dye stuff. Wait do you see if they try to get rid of high fructose corn syrup or
Oh my gosh.
drugs on TV? I mean, there would be multi billion-dollar lawsuits, and it's tied up in the court. So again, it's up to us. We got to do it ourselves.
Right.
Daisy doesn't get a choice of what she gets to eat because I feed her and she's getting meat, but the rest of us get to pick, and we pick for our families, and we need to make the right decisions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that I agree with you 100%. I think that is a great step in the right direction. Particularly, I did notice in the food guidance that it said that sugar, any added sugar, is not recommended for children.
Hmm.
And, it shouldn't be recommended for any of us. But I think that that's really, really great if we can remove, all this candy and just, here's the thing, we want our kids to be at their best, but what we're giving them doesn't allow them to be their best. So I really was happy to see that, but that 10% fat cap that threw me off a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I mean, people think, well, if I just give my kids some chocolate chip cookies or bake them a pie or give them buy some candy at the store, they're going to love me more. I'm the good guy. And then the reality is, yeah, they may say, "Hey, mom, we love you, thank you," or something like that. But the end of the day is making them sick, and potentially leading them to have mental health disorders, or, God
Mhm.
forbid, obesity or diabetes later on
Right.
in life, is not love. I mean, that's the opposite of that. You're actually harming the kids. And so teaching the kids that, nutrition impacts the health is probably the more loving thing to do. And
Yes.
I think it's the easy way. The lazy way is to just give the kids what they're crying for in the store. And we got to get the candy out of schools. It's frustrating when you go into a classroom and the teacher's handing out candy for good behavior. Oh,
Yes.
okay. It's good. You raise your hand. Here's a lollipop. It's like
Exactly.
that's and then, that was I don't know when some schools have gotten better about that, but that's still
Mhm.
still the thing. The thought is I get a treat. I get a sugary treat for a certain behavior, and
Yes.
that's really not a good message to send people, because then people they co-opt it themselves, and then if they feel like they've been good, they reward themselves. I deserve, and
Yep.
see the commercials. Don't you deserve? You deserve the best. Have a big old box of chocolate or something like that.
Yep.
And the reality is, if I deserve the best, I deserve not to be sick. You know,
Exactly.
so that's
Yep.
the way we got to think about it.
I love that. I like, my philosophy is I do not deserve all the things that I gave myself by being on Cheeto all those years and struggling, So yeah, it was really, really difficult. So I want to just kind of talk a little bit about the difference between, just starting on a ketogenic lifestyle, or even if it's primarily meat based or if it's a keto or, low carb way of eating, and as a therapeutic intervention as versus a long-term lifestyle? Is there any difference there?
Well, it can be certainly. And again, this is something I see with our patients at Rivero. Some of them need to be very strict. They have very tight parameters that need to be, and other people, depending on what they're trying to deal with, don't quite need as much rigidity. And I think that that's true. And I think people that actually heal themselves may find that they have a little bit more wiggle room. I mean, I don't expect people to eat a strict red meat, salt, water diet for the rest of their life with no exceptions ever. I mean, that's not realistic. I don't think that happens. I think there's very few people that actually can maintain that over the long haul, including myself. And I've done it for years. But every once in a while, I will have something that is, not that. And even
Mhm.
though most, like I said, 98% of my diet has been fully carnivorous. So I think that there's something, and again, I'm not religious about it. I'm not dogmatic about it. I think, at the end of the day, I want to see healthy people, whatever that means for them. And my expertise is in these low carb, keto, and carnivore diets mostly, and particularly the carnivore diet. And so I use that as a tool. And certainly, I've seen people overcome, just all kinds of tremendous struggles with diet that way, cure all kinds of diseases, put them in remission, whatever you want to use
Mhm.
for terminology. And then I see people that prefer to and successfully incorporate some other foods back in there. I have no problem with that. I think that's fine. I'm not going to kick
Yeah.
them out the club or, talk bad about people like that. It's the one thing that frustrates me is sometimes people will, transition from carnivore and then start saying, oh, carnivore is not appropriate or something like that, when that's what they use themselves to get healthy.
Mhm.
And like I said, I'm interested in getting sick people healthy. I'm not so concerned about healthy people maintaining, that's, if you want to, if you want to get a tattoo and, tattoo yourself, put carnivore on your arm or, whatever, that's up to you. That's fine. You do whatever you want.
Right.
And,
Right.
like I said, and I mean, it's important to be part of a community. And I think
Mhm.
that that's very helpful. We know that being in a supportive environment um, tends to improve outcomes. So yeah, I mean, you can join your group, join your tribe, join your family, whatever it is, and have fun with that. And if that's what you need and that works for you, I'm fully supportive of that as well. Again, like, at the end of the day, like I said, we live in a time, in a place, in a society where so many people are suffering and sick, both physically and mentally. That's just not good for society. That leads to strife, friction, anxiety, aggression, violence, all the
Mhm.
stuff we could do without. I mean, life's better when everybody's happy and smiling, high fives and,
Exactly.
rather than just angering at each other. And there's so much of that we see these days, which is, you just want to, I don't want to look at that stuff. It's just, I
Yeah.
don't need that in my life. It's a bunch of negative stuff. So anyway,
Exactly. Yeah, I definitely agree with you about the community piece. I found that when I started carnivore, I was the only person that I knew
mhm.
that was doing it, and I think that was common about 3 years ago. I mean, there's been this explosion lately over the last few years, but so that's pretty much why. I mean, I that's why I started doing YouTube because I'm like,
And to find somebody. Yeah.
yeah. And so that community piece is a huge, huge factor. I want to ask this question because I find this that when I have tried to incorporate certain plants back into my way of eating, I have discovered that those, and even dairy too, I can't really tolerate too much dairy. Um, that those were the things that were causing my problems. So I had really, really bad eczema. I might be able to show a picture of it, but yeah, and then I had this terrible anxiety, racing thought. I mean, just a whole series, a litany of things that were going on. And when I tried to reincorporate plants, I found that those were the culprit causing my problem. So
Mhm.
I'm just curious to know, are you finding that a lot of people are struggling with reincorporation of plants?
Well, yeah, it depends on what it is, but yeah, for sure. I mean, I know this goes against the sort of the mainstream dietary belief system that for
Mhm.
some people, certain fruits, certain vegetables, certain grains are just not good for them, and
Yeah.
I think we have to accept that. Some people, they may be okay for. Not everybody thrives on broccoli. Not everybody thrives on, strawberries and blueberries, even though some people enjoy them and say they're whole foods. And I mean, because I see everyday people that are on whole food diets, and when they give up the plant food, the vegetables, the fruits, their health gets better. I mean,
Mm,
it's just undeniable at this point. I've seen it
right.
over and over again, times a thousand,
Mhm.
and so we have to realize that there's something there. Now, some people, gain or regain or lose the capacity for these things. I've seen people where, like some people have had dairy intolerances or egg intolerances, and those get better as their gut improves.
Mm,
So
mhm.
I think that, I think this is a kind of a malleable thing. I mean, it's subject to change over time. So it's like, I think, again, when we talk about how long does it take to heal a gut that's damaged, for some
Mhm.
people it's a few weeks, for some people it's, a year or more. It just depends on who it is and what they're dealing with and how badly they're damaged.
So, speaking about the gut and when we think about gut health, can you just kinda give us a little bit idea what you're talking about? Are you talking about microbiome? Are you talking about, like, leaky gut,
Yeah.
or those kinds of things?
Well, I mean, I think gut health is incorporates a number of things. I mean,
Mm,
the microbiome we call, dysbiosis would be, a sort of a pathologic microbiome. We have, the gut permeability is, our gut has to be permeable, otherwise we would starve to death. We got to get something. We got to get food from the gut into the bloodstream, so it has to be
mhm.
permeable. But that
Right.
permeability can become hyperpermeable, and you have this so-called leaky gut syndrome, where now things that aren't supposed to be getting through the filter get through. Um, but we have also other issues with gut motility being a problem, how well the gut contracts to move food along. There's problem with acid production, there's problem with enzyme production, there's problems with absorption. So there's a whole host of things that have to be, um, working for us to have good health. And I think diet impacts all of them, and a lot of and many other lifestyle things impact it as well. But again, generally, because we're told over and over again that fiber is critical or essential for good gut health. And yet,
Mhm.
I see all the time people that remove the fiber from their diet when they eat a carnivore diet see that their gut function improves. The pain goes away,
Yes.
the bloat goes away. If they have things
Mhm.
like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, the bleeding goes away. So you can't deny that. I mean, when you talk about what's good health, and I need people that define good health, gut health, as strictly some magic, bacterial population. You got to have X amount of, Bacteroides and Firmicutes, and there's got to be these ratios. I think that's
Yeah.
a little bit of putting the cart before the horse. And I think some people said it best, healthy people have healthy gut microbiomes, whatever that may be. And it could be different. It
Okay.
could vary from person to person. And to sit there and prescribe that, if you do a biopsy of someone, look at someone's poop and say, I can tell if you're healthy or not based on your poop. I think that's a little bit, presumptive, because there can be
Okay.
people that are very healthy with maybe a different makeup, depending
Mhm.
on a whole bunch of variables. And they've had some. There was a study done about a year ago looking at carnivorous microbiomes, and they saw the carnivorous microbiome, when you compare it to standard references, was right at the top of goodness. So
Oh, wow.
it doesn't show some, like, for, again, this is at least a couple examples. I can't speak for every single person, but I don't see any evidence, other than theoretical, that a carnivore is going to give you a dysbiotic gut.
Interesting. I'm curious to know whether or not you think there's any supplementation that is needed for, for healthy gut microbiome.
I guess it depends on the diet you're consuming.
I
This
mean,
is the thing.
I'm talking about carnivores.
On carnivore, for most
Yeah.
people, probably not. I mean, I know there's a push for some people to eat like a lot of fermented products, like fermented
Mhm.
dairy, fermented vegetables, it's kimchi, sauerkraut, or kefirs or yogurts and things like that. And I think, honestly, one of the problems we have, a lot of people have a problem with fermentation occurring in their gut. And so we
Mhm.
see, like if you're eating raw vegetables, or even cooked vegetables, and they start fermenting in your gut, you get this discomfort, this bloating and pain. So if you ferment them ahead of time, that tends not to hurt. So it doesn't hurt as much. And so people maybe misconstrue that as, oh, now my gut is not as painful, so that must be healthy food for me. When I think the
Oh,
reality is, just eliminating the fermentation process is probably less symptom causing. And so I don't necessarily think so. Although, again, I'm not here to say I never tend to speak in absolutes. there's probably
Mhm.
some people for, these things, adding these things that maybe have some benefit. And I, try it, see how it goes. It's like, how did it work out for you? Like old Dr. Phil says, well, how's that working out for you? It's working
Right.
out well. Hey, keep doing it. Keep doing what you're doing. I mean, if it ain't
Exactly.
broke, don't fix it. But don't be afraid to experiment. I mean, I think within reason. I mean, I don't think, anybody has I don't think there's anybody would promote this, but like we have a deficiency of eating, Doritos and uh, you
Right.
know, you know, that type of stuff, that type of processed food, so, you can avoid that. Again, I would say, broadly speaking, let's stick to whole real unprocessed foods, keep high quality nutrient dense stuff like animal products. Maybe the other stuff has a place for some people, and then see
Okay.
where you get. And then usually it's elimination rather than adding. If you have an
Mm.
issue with what you're eating, it's often you're eating the wrong food, not that you're missing some magic supplement.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for that. We have a question coming in. I'm gonna go ahead and ask this question.
Okay.
Um, is it okay to take creatine on carnivore?
Well, I mean, the police aren't going to come and yell at you if you do. I mean, I'm not
Right.
your mother. You do what you want. I mean, you can do whatever you want. Is creatine probably so? Creatine is going to be the people that are going to have the most benefit from creatine. And I know creatine has made a lot of the news lately, talking about
Yes, it
cognitive
has.
benefits and cardiovascular benefits. For the longest time, it's been purely viewed as an athletic performance tool, and it worked. I mean, it's got pretty good data on that. And as you guys are probably aware, creatine comes from animal foods. Particularly red meat is high in creatine. So this is a supplement derived from animal foods, which works
Mm,
well. So people that are creatine deficient tend to benefit significantly. And so when we see these older folks, these demented people that they're doing these studies on and saying, oh, look, if we
mm,
give them 20 grams of creatine a day, their cognition improves, because they've
mm.
probably spent their whole life eating a low fat diet, avoiding red meat, listening to their doctors, and now they're demented. And now, surprise, surprise, when you give them a nutrient that's found in red meat, they get a benefit. So, obviously you're not going to get 20 grams of creatine from eating meat unless you're eating like 10 pounds of it a day or something like that, which no one really does. Um, However, creatine has a sort of a saturation effect, that we get the storage capacity. And I think if you're eating red meat every day for years and years and years, you're not low on creatine. It's probably
Okay.
unlikely that creatine supplementation is going to provide any significant benefit. Now, if you're on a vegan diet, a vegetarian diet, you haven't eaten red meat in years, by all means, load up on creatine. But I think in the context of a carnivore diet, it's probably likely to have minimal impact. So I would save my money. Again, I could be wrong. Maybe you'll take it and your brain will turn on and you'll start lifting double the amount of weight in your gym, but probably not. I don't personally take creatine. I've taken it in the past years ago,
Mhm.
back in the day, because I know it's a pretty good supplement. But I think, for most people on a carnivore diet, the benefits are going to be probably fairly mild.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for your question, Bob Morse. All right. So I want to kind of talk about maybe a little bit of the pros and cons sort of thing. What are the strongest legitimate critiques of carnivore that you think deserve more attention?
Well, I mean, the strongest like critiques that actually bear out over time are that, sustainability. There's
Mm.
not a lot of people that stay on it long term. I mean, there are, like Charger Mopar Richter has been doing it for 40 some years, so
Yeah.
he'd be
Right.
one of the few in the case. And I mean, in myself, I've been doing it, like I said, almost 10 years. Again, with the
Hmm.
caveats, occasionally I'll stray from that, but not very often. I think that's probably the most legitimate criticism that people don't do it. But I will say that most people that go carnivore continue to eat a very meat heavy diet. I mean, they kind of
Hmm.
discover that this is a real nutritious food. It's been wrongly demonized. They learn to love it. They learn to realize how beneficial it is. So, I mean, I think that's a valid criticism that, just like any diet, no one's going to stick to a strict diet for 30, 40, 50 years with rare exception, Rick being the exception in our group right now.
Yes. Right.
There are, obviously the criticism that it will raise your cholesterol. I think it's a valid criticism. I think a lot of people on going
Mm.
carnivore, they see their cholesterol rise.
That's
Now,
right. Hmm.
the flip side of that question is that a bad thing? And I think that's a controversial topic right now. I don't know that unequivocally you can say that it is we should just ignore it because we're on carnivore. I don't take that stance. But at the same time, I do think that the evidence seems to be suggesting that there's more to it than just high LDL equals heart disease or high ApoB equals heart disease. I think, we're getting more and more data on that, and I think more to come. So stay tuned for that, because it doesn't mean, stop eating carnivore and take massive amounts of statins. That may not be the right answer either. So I think it's something that's a little bit more nuanced. I think imaging is very helpful in this situation. Again,
Mm-hmm.
these are some of the questions and answers we deal with Rivero all the time, depending on the patient. I think, one of the recent ones I hear a lot about is this concept of insulin suppression or raising, increased glucose on carnivore. And I do think that some people do experience that. I think it depends on their situation, their insulin sensitivity, what's going on. I think that, again, as I talked about at the beginning, let's talk about what's going on around our waistline. If we're getting leaner, generally that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
If your blood glucose drifts up a little bit, I'm not convinced that that's necessarily negative. For a lot of cases, there can be some normal physiological adaptations that occur to this. We don't have data. Again, we don't have long-term data. I can point to data from the 1920s when they were looking at some of the indigenous folks in Alaska, a lot of the Inuit, and they found that a lot of those guys had high fasting blood glucose, but they seemed to be very healthy. They didn't have diabetes. They didn't have any of the known consequences of diabetes back in the day. And again, this is
Mm-hmm.
1920s, 1930s. So I think that is something that is, just kind of a new concern. I think the belief that you have to have carbs to perform as an athlete. I think we talked about this earlier, or maybe it was last. Sorry, I've just done two
Yeah,
podcasts in a
we
row.
did talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think those are largely unfounded for the vast majority of people. Um, the concerns, obviously we just talked about cholesterol. The concerns
Mm-hmm.
around thyroid suppression is another one that, again, it's context dependent. I think most people, maybe they see their T3 go down, but they don't have any clinical signs of hypothyroidism. I think the biggest thing to realize is labs on carnivore are not necessarily going to line up with what an omnivorous lab set would look like, and it may not be a
Yes.
bad thing. So we have to have educated clinicians that
Mm-hmm.
understand this and know how to interpret this data and know how to put it in perspective. Again, we are still learning here. I mean, we're, like I said, this modern carnivore movement is only a few years old, and so I'm only now, like I said, the first randomized control trial is commencing right now, which I had a part in getting that off the ground. It's happening up in
Nice.
Canada. It's looking at
Mm.
patients. It's comparing people that are on a um, I'll call it carnivorous diet, because they allow for a small amount of non-carnivore food, because that's what the IRB would accept. We couldn't get a
Mm-hmm.
full study through there that somebody would be willing to pay for, and we were able to raise $1 million for it. So
Wow,
that
that's great.
hopefully that'll be underway and finished sometime within this year.
Nice.
And so we'll be looking at obesity and prediabetes as a primary group, randomized into two groups. One group will be eating the standard healthy diet as described by the USDA. So this will be the 1920 dietary guidelines.
Okay.
And then we're going to
Mm-hmm.
compare it to a diet that is 70% beef at least, and then another 20% of eggs and fish and dairy products. And then there's
Nice.
an allowance for 10% of things like berries and some small things if the person wants to, if they need it. Not required though. So we'll see what
That's
happens. I know a lot of people are
exciting.
critical of that, but that's the reality of getting these things financed and paid for and through an IRB at this time. So
Yeah, I think that is very exciting. I can't wait to hear
yeah.
what the outcome is. I know that we are almost out of time. So I want to ask you this last question. And my question is, so what question do you wish that more interviewers would ask you, but they rarely do?
Oh my gosh. um wow. I mean, I guess because I've been doing carnivore for so long and I'm known as the carnivore guy, um I really I've talked about that as more than probably just about anybody on planet Earth. So I can talk about that all day and all night, and I enjoy talking about it. But I do think there's a lot more to health than just what we eat. And
Yeah.
I'm a big exercise person. I love that stuff. I mean, I love
Ah,
talking about that. That's my favorite stuff to talk about. Quinine. I'd rather talk about that than carnivore diet, believe it or not. Even though I love talking about the wins and the successes and the wonderful health transformation. It's so rewarding. It's spiritually, it makes you feel so good as a person. But I'm really into like some of the performance stuff, and I think that's as I approach 60, as you said, you're soon, but you and I are both in that same category.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have a crop of 60, 70, and 80-year olds like never before. People doing
Mm,
things that never were imaginable before,
it's
and we're already
awesome.
starting to see that. Because if we look at you know, when did people start exercising for the first time en masse, global populations? And it really didn't
Mhm.
start, at the very beginning of the 1970s, a little bit with the bodybuilding
Mhm.
movement, but really 80s and 90s when people started regularly going to the gym and working out. And just now those people are starting to get into their 70s and 80s. And we're seeing some incredible people in that age demographic that
Wow.
just blow what you think was possible. And I think it's only going to get better and better. And I think we are going to see some 100-year-old people that are jacked and tan and looking good and strong and fit and lean and performing well and moving well. And I think that's the exciting part of the future. But you gotta do the preventive maintenance, and you gotta stay after it. And so I hopefully some of your listeners will get that. It's more than just nutrition. Um, why do what would you imagine you'd like to? I mean, all of us like to be able to fly around. We fly like a bird. That'd be really cool.
Exactly.
It's like, what are
Yeah,
these
that'd
cool
be
things you
cool.
could do? But I mean, at the
Mhm.
very least, it's so fun. Like you said, skipping with your grandkids, being able to run and jump and play like you could when you were a kid,
Mhm.
or as close to that as you can get. Now, if all you can do is barely get up and down off the couch, life's not that
Mm,
fun. And so we
right.
do diet to improve some of the inflammation, maybe lose some weight, but then where do we evolve from there? And I think it's the sky's the limit for honestly most people. Most people can do a heck of a lot more than they think they can.
Well, that is awesome. I'm gonna have to have you back now because we're gonna have to talk about movement and exercise
Be happy to. Yeah, I've got like I said,
performance.
I've got another book coming out probably in the I don't know 6 months or something like that. So maybe that'll be a time because that'll be touched on in
Yeah.
that book. So
Awesome. Well, Dr. Baker, thank you so much for being here with me today on Carnivorous Grandma Speaks, chatting with the doctors. If you could hang out for a second, we'll just touch base right afterwards.
okay,
We'll be back here next Saturday evening for Carnivorous Grandma Speaks, and we're going to just catch up and chat. I'm going to have a hop on, hop off. So come on over and come in, and let's talk about how World Carnivore Month has been going for you. All right, you guys, we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
bye bye, guys.